Now, CIR Group is more than 40 years old and remains controlled by the family of Carlo de Benedetti, who founded it back in 1976. The Italian holding company, has a wide range of interests across sectors, including media, automotive components, healthcare, and, of course, financial services. It controls the publisher of newspapers, including La Repubblica, and manufactures automobile parts for some of the world's biggest car makers. Now, based in Milan and employing more than 14,000 people, the group reported revenues of 2.6 billion euros last year. Well, joining us now for an exclusive conversation is Rodolfo de Benedetti, chairman of CIR Group and partner at Decaglia Asset Management. Rodolfo, always a pleasure to host you here in the studio, so thank you so much for coming in. When you look at your various interests across the board, and the mood out there in the economy and growth is actually not that bad, where do you see the biggest opportunities?
I think the mood is actually good, and this is refreshing, and we're kind of not used to it in Europe. I was in the US a month ago, and I was surprised to see how people are, generally speaking, pretty concerned there about a bunch of issues and very positive about Europe. There's a lot of capital moving into Europe, and I think this is based on the fact that the two largest countries in the continent, Germany and France, look like they have found some political stability, which is clearly reassuring for markets. And the macro GDP numbers have been quite good lately. Low interest rate environment. So we can't complain. This is a pretty good environment.
Where do you think the biggest risk comes from? So I don't know if it's a high euro, because some of the things that you sell may be, of course, I guess a little bit dependent on a favorable exchange rate, or whether it's central bank policy.
I'm not too concerned about currencies, because yes, it is true that there has been a fairly significant movement in the euro dollar in the last few months. But putting it into perspective, historically we're not that, off levels that Europe has been used to compete with in global markets for a long time. So yes, it is a bit worse to compete at 120 than it was at 1.8, but Europe has been used to 150 or 160 a few years ago, so I'm not too concerned about that. I think, central bank policies and how central bank will manage to get out of a very loose monetary policy and QE that has been with us for a long time now, and for which market has been used to it. I think this is going to be a challenge, and I think that is where I would see most risks in terms of how central banks manage this process.
For your business, Rodolfo, or also for the asset manager business? Because you started this, it means possibly more liquidity, right? More volatility, which in return makes markets more interesting.
Yeah, I think actually for the asset management business, we launched the company about a bit more than 3 years ago, and I think this is a fairly interesting environment in that business. There are a lot of changes, but changes means opportunities, and if you're nimble and flexible enough, I think there are plenty of opportunities. Clearly, managing capital in a very low interest rate environment is very challenging, but it is challenging for everybody, and I think there's a business there, and I think there is added value if you have the right ideas.
Is MiFID too good for you or bad for you in the asset management business? And we see definitely consolidation, right, amongst the bigger players. Yeah,
I think that there is clearly going to be consolidation. I think for some business models, MiFID II is going to be a big issue. I think, it seems to me that a lot of people are still not ready for it. Thinking that this should happen January 1st next year. I still see a lot of confusion in a number of issues.
What, in the pricing, or how they model, for example,
in
research?
In the prices, research, and how people will pay for that, and how banks will, position themselves to sell research, and how, asset managers will charge or not their investors for it, or absorb that cost. I think that's a bit still, unclear and undecided.
Are you ready for electric cars? Does that impact your car parts business?
Yeah, definitely will. I think, electrification in the car industry is a major trend. I personally think that the timing is, in my opinion, is going to be a bit longer than what some people expect. I think there is a lot of enthusiasm today, both from investors and capital markets, as well as a lot of announcement from car makers. I think, you know, this is a big opportunity, but also a huge risk for those that have, you know, legacy businesses that have been built, and, you know, capital and technology that, you know, could become obsolete in a matter of a few years. So this could be a huge change, and obviously this is also a challenge for suppliers and components as we are, but it's, as always, also I think an opportunity. So we are, you know, we are prepared for it. We're getting prepared. I think we'll have ample time to adjust. I think that there are still, you know, huge infrastructural challenges to reach a very significant penetration of pure EVs, as some, you know, analysts think. And so, in my opinion, it's going to be more. It's going to just take more time.
Rodolfo, are we going to have electric driverless cars, or is driverless the kind of the El Dorado that would, you know, that will take an even longer time? Are we jumping the gun a little bit when you're talking about these things?
I think so. I think definitely, you know, technology is reshaping a lot of industries, and I think the car industry is certainly going to be, you know, hugely affected over the next 20 years by changing technology, and we have seen this already. I mean, the electronic component of a car today, as opposed to 10 years ago, is just, you know, uncomparable. And I think this will just continue and possibly accelerate. To believe that, you know, we're going to have in large cities, you know, driverless cars tomorrow, I think we are not there.
Okay, Rodolfo, thank you so much. Rodolfo Benedetti stays with us. We'll have more. We'll talk a little bit about his Italy and, of course, some of the reforms going there and what that means also if the company is affected by a possible anti-globalization mood. So we'll discuss that next. We'll have your data check. This is Bloomberg. Yeah, but they do have a real conjure. It is kind of like an interesting Thursday when it comes to inflation, BOE, and, of course, possibly Fed expectations in the future. Now let's get back to our exclusive conversation with Rodolfo De Benedetti. He's the chairman of CIR Group and partner of Decalia Asset Management. Rodolfo, thank you so much for sticking around. We were talking before about the fact that actually you're a little bit more optimistic than you were in the past about prospects for growth in Europe, also for your asset manager business. What is the biggest unknown? Is there something that keeps you up at night? And I know you have various interests in various industry groups, or is it almost a natural hedge?
I think we operate in very different businesses that have different cycles and that have very little correlation between them, which is the whole purpose of having a portfolio and a diversified portfolio. So I think, you know, one of the issues we have is exposure to the domestic economy in Italy, because by nature, two of our businesses tend to be local. One is media, the other one is healthcare services. And those are not, you know, businesses that you easily export. And so most of our business is in Italy. So we are tied to the performance of the domestic economy, which, as you know, have been lagging the rest of Europe for the last 10 years. And I think this is, you know, mostly due to the fact that there are structural reforms which have not been carried on as they should have. And this has led to a divergent result in terms of the economy and the growth prospects for Italy compared to some other countries. And I think, you know, the cases of Germany or even the case of Spain, which is probably more similar and more comparable to Italy, show that you know, whenever you forcefully and decidedly attack those structural issues and implement those reforms, you can reap significant benefits in terms of GDP growth, employment, and therefore consumption. And I think this is one of the issues that we have in Italy, which is, I think we're late. Okay,
but is Italy ready to be reformed? Because everything comes with a kind of political tint. You have to have a country that wants to change.
Yes.
So no matter who comes in power in the next elections, which have to be held by you know, almost the end of the first quarter of next year, will people want change that is good for the economy, or is there a concern that actually they are just fed up?
It's a good question. I think there's a difficult answer to that question. I think you know, it seems that there is quite a lot of confusion today in terms of what the outcome could be, because according to polls, it might be the case that none of the three large blocs will have an absolute majority and therefore be able to form a government and basically govern. And so the risk is a coalition government, and as it goes with coalition governments, you tend to choose the minimum common denominator, and you tend to basically try to smooth plans and programs, and that is not necessarily conducive to, significant reforms.
Yeah, you need the appetite for it, and of course the meeting of minds. Talk to me about your medical business. So you were telling me in the break that actually it doesn't really get impacted by budgets so much, but do reforms of the medical system or public spending in Italy, will it have an impact on that unit?
Yes, I think we are in a regulated, or at least partly regulated business, but where regulation in Italy is done at the regional levels. There is not really a national healthcare system in Italy, but so much a 20-plus regions healthcare system, which is funded locally, and where the rules get decided locally. So typically, tariffs or licenses, authorizations, all this is decided locally. So what is very important in our market is to choose where you want to go and where you don't want to go, because not all regions are born equal, and actually there are some pretty significant discrepancies between them. We have built this business from scratch in the last 15 years, and that has enabled us to really pick and choose and decide the footprint in terms of geographical presence that we thought was ideal, and the business has developed very nicely. It clearly capitalized on aging population and the growing need of some sort of services for that population, which tend to contract chronic illness or become non-self-sufficient, and that really creates the need.
So, Rodolfo, very quickly, and unfortunately we're running out of time, but out of your units, is that the one that will grow the most? Because I think Italy also has like 1.2 children per family, so it's one of the lowest actually, where, for a young population.
Yes. Yeah, I think we are one of the oldest countries in the world, and we're aging fast, which is bad for a lot of things, but for this business is good. And this is actually one of the reasons why they decided to build this business back then. So we're pretty constructive and pretty excited about this business. There is still a lot of fragmentation, so what we're doing is really consolidating this industry, and so we are growing the business both by internal growth as well as by external growth, and we see a lot of opportunities to grow that business.
Rodolfo, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks
for coming in. Rodolfo Benedetti, the chairman of CIR Group and partner of Decalia Asset Management. Up next, will Saudi Arabia be forced to postpone the IPO of its state-owned oil company? We discuss that. We go live to the Middle East. This is Bloomberg.